First of all, I'm Jackie Davis. I live in New York. I'm an arts administrator. I work at the Performing Arts Library at Lincoln Center. And along the line, we have several great people, including, in order, Zeynep Çelik, who is an architectural historian and educator, and lives in the U.S. but was born in Turkey, so has a perspective that I'm really interested in hearing, and I know you will be too. We have Note Vidal, who's an artist, sculptor, and painter from Switzerland. And next to him, Rob Lefrenay, who is a curator, the arts catalyst in the UK. And by that, he is a presenter and will be speaking about the role that he has played in bringing the art to life. After that, we have Guy Gypens. Guy is our rapporteur today, and Guy comes from Brussels. Leah Barber is a dancer and sometimes choreographer. And Sébastien is from New York, by the way. And Sébastien is an artist, sculptor from Mexico City. And Gabrielle is our youth representative, and she also happens to be the daughter of Sébastien. She also is an artist herself. So as you can see, I've got this amazing group of people to talk to you. So the topic is the art of public space and the culture of cities. I'm going to do two things very quickly, which is to say to you that as we are going to be talking about art and the power of art, we are talking about performing and visual arts and the role that they play in global interdependence. And I think only Ben and Lee have heard me say this before, but I want to ask you to take this kind of concept from me to you, which is that if you think about the power of the arts and you go into a specific place, and that place where you don't know the people around you, but you experience that work together, then you have a common experience, and in some way you formed a common community. That is what we mean about the art that we're going to be talking about, the presenting and visual arts. Now, on to public space. I've taken the prerogative of the moderator, because we could talk about lots of different public spaces, but for the purpose of this panel, given the people I have on the panel, I'm going to describe that public space as somewhere that you might go in a square and you're looking for a restaurant and you happen to see a performing arts event. It may be that you're very directed to go see Sebastian's sculpture in Mexico City that's sitting somewhere in a field and you need to go find it. That's another public space. You may want to go into an atrium and you're looking for a performance or a visual artwork or a collection of work. That's another public space. You also may want to pray, and there's a public space that has been set up for that kind of prayer. Certainly in Istanbul, that's an appropriate example. One of the things that I thought about when I thought about public space was, from my own experience in New York, when you have thousands and thousands of people that you can see from television or physically directly being at Times Square on New Year's Eve. People from every culture across the world who come together. And when they come together, they're not coming together in anger, they're coming together and they're experiencing the same thing, which is performances and the dropping of the ball and the celebration of a new year to come. That certainly involves public space and the art that has to do with it. What we're really looking for here today is what happens when art in public space can, through the work of the artists or these presenters, cause this communication across cultures. And I'm going to start with Zeynep, who is our historian. And the question, we've developed some questions here. Zeynep, in thinking about this city and thinking about Istanbul, can you give us two examples from history, or an example, about how people were able to come together across cultures, which led to the betterment of Istanbul society? And I will say that I have to be strict. Everyone has a time period. And I'm going to ask forgiveness of the panelists. I will stop you when I have to stop you in order to be able for everyone to have time to speak. So Zeynep?
Okay, I'm going to turn away from the people and look at architecture and urban forms as they reflect the intersection of cultures. And for this, I chose to look at a square that you cannot miss in the city, which is the Hagia Sophia Square, and appended to it the Hippodrome.
The microphone doesn't work.
Oh, microphone doesn't work.
No, the microphone is for that.
Shall I start all over again? I can raise my voice.
Yes,
Do you want me?
To.
Okay, but you give me the extra 30 seconds.
Start.
Okay, I'm starting all over again. I'm not going to talk about crowds in the square, but I'm going to talk about buildings in the square. And to give you a most blatant example, I turn to the square between Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque. You all have seen it. You're going to see it if you haven't seen it. Make sure you see it if you are here for another day or so. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about the Hippodrome right next to it. Now, these places, these squares, these public spaces, indeed do reflect the intersection of cultures, is this going to work? Is it working? Good, I don't have to scream. Okay, and I am not sure I can always call the intentions behind the appropriation of space is for the how did you phrase it, betterment of the humankind. It's not always so. It's most often for grabbing power. And that's what we're going to see, I think, in Hagia Sophia Square. But ultimately, the original intentions don't matter. For us today, what we see today is a coexistence of different cultures and the coming together of, the peeling of history, really layers of history, which is interesting. We put in your packages, or we distributed a 2-page historic description of this area, and basically you can go through what I'm going to talk about very briefly here, not exactly the same things, by reading that. And I think you understand how it is impossible to go through all the history of behind this square, but I'd like you to consider very briefly, for example, the complexity of the place. When you think that Constantine, who founded the city in the around 330, brought with him elements from pagan Rome, and they're still there. He was founding a Christian city, but the pagan elements are here. This monuments from Rome. Most notably, of course, is the Hippodrome itself, which is a Roman circus. But it came with its own historic references. The Hippodrome would not be what it is if it did not refer back to the past, so he made sure there was an Egyptian obelisk here. There's a serpentine column which dates from the 5th century BC. The Egyptian obelisk came from Karnak, so from the very beginning on we have this turning toward history. Then comes the construction of the big church, Hagia Sophia. The Hagia Sophia that you see is the third one. It collapsed twice before. The making of the big Christian cathedral there. A palace on to the east side of the Hippodrome. These were the elements of the Byzantine city. With the Ottoman conquest, Hagia Sophia was, of course, transformed into a mosque. And in the early 17th century, the Blue Mosque, the Sultan Ahmet Mosque, was built on the site of the Byzantine palace, thereby totally appropriating the Hippodrome as an Ottoman public space, and it was used for ceremonial functions. Now, the relationship between Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque is also very, very interesting, facing each other over a time period of 11 centuries and creating a most prominent axis of the city. So this is the outline. However, I think when we look a little bit deeper into the meanings of these buildings, we see interesting things happening. Of course, Hagia Sophia's transformation into a mosque immediately following the Ottoman conquest speaks about the domination of one culture over the other, the domination of one religion over the other. But then there's something interesting. The name of the church does not change. It becomes the Mosque of Hagia Sophia. Now, you can interpret it in two ways. On the one hand, it is, of course, taking it over and making it a mosque, but it's still Hagia Sophia. It is a blatant statement of the Sultan's power. On the other hand, it continues to remind the citizens, everybody, the origins of the building, perhaps paralleling Islam's claim to be the last religion and to embrace all the previous religions. There's an even more intriguing example, I think. It is about a smaller church which was built as a model for Hagia Sophia. It was built 6 or 7 years before Hagia Sophia. Saint Sergius and Bacchus, it's marked on the map that you have in your packages. Now, what's really interesting here is that I really, really recommend that you go and see that little mosque. Hagia Sophia is a very complex structure, very difficult, very new experiment. They first built a life-size model, but a small model, which has exactly the same plan, the same organization, but manageable. Now, the church, as I told you before, was called Saint Sergius and Bacchus. When this church was transformed into a mosque, and it is still a mosque today, the name, it was given that very curious name, the Little Hagia Sophia. In fact, guarding the original meaning of the church and highlighting the original meaning of the church much better than it was done under the Byzantine days. I am done. So, what is it that I want to say here? The buildings do tell us quite a lot. The buildings and the urban forms do tell us quite a lot about the intersection of cultures and religions, as well as power relations. We just have to read them a little bit closely.
That was excellent, thank you. And I think it also brings to mind, without even saying so, the influence of religion, also the influence of the political organizations, and how over time different public spaces change, and how those public spaces and the rules that are a part of what might happen or cannot happen are part of every history and every country. I'm going to turn now to Sebastian, and I'm going to ask him to talk about a work that in his experience as a sculptor has had a major influence in the sense that it developed either controversy or a lot of discussion. And his doctor will translate.
Una obra tremendamente controvertida en México.
It's a work of art that I made that was tremendously controversial in Mexico.
Es el caballito de la Ciudad de México, obra monumental de 26 metros de altura.
It's a little horse, or el caballito, in Mexico City. That's one of the icons of the city. It's a monumental sculpture of 26 meters of height.
Es el destino de todo ícono, de todo signo, de todo símbolo para una ciudad a nivel urbano, que cuando hay novedad se hace la controversia.
It's the destiny of an icon of every urban city, that when there's a novelty around the city, there's controversy immediately.
Es el origen de estas piezas. Esta pieza tenía un 90% de controversia y en la actualidad en contra, y en la actualidad tiene un 90% en pro, porque el pueblo la ha aceptado y la ha convivido.
It's the origin of the piece when it was first made, that the controversy around it was such that it was the people were not accepting it. It was like 90% against the piece, and now after more than 10 years have passed, people have made it part of the culture, and they accept it and love it as part of them.
Una obra urbana monumental está en la calle, es absolutamente democrática, es absolutamente pública y es interdependiente por naturaleza.
Immediately, a work of art that's public and it's on the street becomes democratic, public, and
Interdependiente por naturaleza.
Interdependent by nature.
Porque se participa del pueblo, una obra urbana monumental es propiedad de los ricos y de los pobres, todo no escapa a la vista de ricos y pobres, de todo el pueblo, por eso es tremendamente democrática.
It becomes immediately democratic because it's a work of art that can be both enjoyed by poor or rich. It's not only something for a set of eyes, it's made for everyone to look at and enjoy, so it becomes part of the culture and it becomes democratic.
Y es un espacio de la ciudad, un espacio público, un espacio de recreo que a través de la historia de la humanidad, desde las cavernas hasta nuestros días, ha sido absolutamente necesario representar este tipo de hitos.
It becomes part of the
Sí. A través de la historia,
as the history comes by, even from the age of the caverns to now,
estos hitos monumentales,
this monumental itis,
como los dólmenes, los
like the
menires,
dolmens or the menhirs,
la columna de Trajano,
the Trajan column,
la puerta de Micenas,
the door of Micenas,
los arcos de triunfo
the
de todas las
triumphs of all
culturas,
the cultures,
son abiertamente monumentales.
they're openly monumental.
Eso es lo que en la actualidad, en moderno, es lo que yo hago.
That's what nowadays in my vision is the modern version of this, my language.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to ask you, Gabby, if you would talk a little bit about a different kind of space that comes from somebody who is not as old as I am.
I'm just going to talk to you about a different kind of space that is not usually regarded as public as it should be, which is part of our everyday lives, and it's the most global and interdependent space that you can think of, which is the internet, because it's a part of at least my generation where you can see these public spaces, these public works of art from a different perspective. You're joining millions of people that are watching the same thing at the same space, and it's kind of sad because we're becoming isolated. We become a society that is not immediately connected to each other, but instead of that there's like a computer or something, and there's this new society that surges out of that, which is you can see it present in things like Second Life, which is a society that it becomes parallel to our own society, where people want to be things that they're not in our society, and they experience things differently, which is digitally. And I mean, you can go into the internet and either experience, I don't know, the most beautiful place in the world without having to travel there, but also you can go to this sort of places like Second Life, for example, where you can go experience some other sort of art space that it's not necessarily present in real life, but you experience it as a different being. So it's the new generation of space, which is a different virtual reality, I guess. So.
We're going to come back to that question of space and how you're experiencing, which is different from how the artists and the presenters at the table are. But right now I'd like to ask Leah if you would answer the question related to work that you have danced or work that has influenced you that has a relevance for this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, Jackie. First of all, let me say, I think that people are, by and large, fascinated with dancers in part because we trust the experience of communicating with each other through movement, without words. I think that's something that's kind of fascinating to people who don't have that training and that trust in the ability to communicate through movement. Dancers instantly cross language and cultural boundaries when they work together as soon as they cross geographic boundaries because of that ability. I want to give two examples from my life where I've participated in work, dance work, that I think is deeply relevant, and in my mind, both of these are successful experiences of doing exactly what we're talking about here, creating a community through the art. The first experience was from my early formative years as a modern dancer, and the second experience is from quite recently, as I've reached the end of my performing career as a dancer. I was really formed, I had the great opportunity and honor to be for nearly 20 years in the company of the dance company of Anna Sokolow. Some of you may recognize her name, others may not. She was a contemporary of Martha Graham. She was, in the dance world, truly one of the great artists of the 20th century. I worked with her in the 70s and 80s, and the company that she put together, most of our repertory was she was recreating work that she had created primarily in the 50s and 60s. Deeply humanistic work. Themes included themes of the Holocaust, love, joy, very human themes. She worked with music that other choreographers of the time, even innovative modern dance choreographers, considered undanceable. The work of Alban Berg, of Varese, of Scriabin. No other modern dance choreographer dared to use such powerful and provocative music, or to deal with many of the themes that she worked with. One of the things that attracted me to working with Anna was that when I danced Anna's work, I was representing myself as a human being. I was not her tool. I was not her mouthpiece. I was a human being, and I was in a company of other human beings trying to convey a message through movement of the experience of being a human being. We were all deeply invested in her methods, which were very disciplined, quite severe, but very, very deep. We often would have dinner at her house. Dinner consisted of a small sort of teacup of cottage cheese and yogurt, and then we'd get on to the real rehearsal of the night, which was sitting and listening to her LPs at that time of these marvelous musical works. And she would tell us, when you listen, you must eat the music. That was the kind of language that she used. I appreciated Tavis Smiley's use of today of the word truth. She used that word constantly. She expected us to seek the truth. And it wasn't some ephemeral kind of, nostalgic, sentimental thing. When she talked about truth, she didn't use words. She simply did this. She stood. She was a very tiny, petite, frail-looking woman. She stood on her feet. She extended her arm, and she took the biggest, strongest guy in the room and said, "Push down my wrist." And he'd push, and he'd push, and he'd push, and he couldn't do it. She said, "That is truth. You have to discover for yourselves what that means as a dancer and as a mover." And it took me 20 years. Dancers now, they talk about the core and the exercise. Yes, that's all part of technique. But finding truth in your being is something that takes time and delay and deep introspective work. So truth was that. She also talked about the position of the hand. She didn't want, what she called fancy, ballet hands. She wanted simplicity in her hands, and she talked about prayer. She loved hands in the shape of prayer, and she would say, "This is how your hand should be. There's vulnerability, there's your humanness is in your hand there. So this was my instruction, this was my formation as an artist, and increasingly I understand that that was also part of my formation as a citizen of the world.
That's a perfect segue because you're talking about passion, you're talking about compassion, you're talking about the way that the artistic world brings beauty and also a connection to people who might not otherwise find that connection, like a certain kind of education. So I'm going to ask you to talk about your work. There are so many different facets of this work that I've asked him to just, on the spot, choose a country and talk about the work that he feels he'd like to describe.
Yeah, I would like to give you two examples of my work in Interdependence. One is in West Africa, in a place called Niger, in a city called Agadez, and the other one, since we have someone from Nepal, I would like also to give another example in Kathmandu. I grew up in the Engadine Valley in Switzerland, and we only had to go to school for 7 months, and the 5 remaining months was off, okay? Which was fantastic for a kid, but you better fill it up with something interesting to do. So what we did, what I especially did, was we would go to the woods, build huts and build cabins with running water, and these 5 months went by real fast. So and you had to do a lot with passion. So 10 years ago, I went to Africa. I went to Agadez, and I started to build houses again with the same passion I had when I was young in Switzerland. And so I first built my house, and then at that time I didn't know that if you build a house in Africa, the people who are doing the house, they're actually almost your family. And I counted, and there were 55. So you better come up with something else to do. And the second building was a school. Niger is one of the poorest countries in the world. Agadez is probably the poorest town in this country, and I built this school for 450 kids. And the school is actually a pyramid where people sit. All these 450 kids, they need to sit. And so when they attend school, you don't see the building anymore. The building turns into a human sculpture that moves and sings and even prays. And so afterwards, I did other buildings, a building just to watch the moon, and another one to watch the sunset. Phenomenal dreams that I could only do in a place like Africa, because in this city there are no laws, there are no permits, and you can go very fast. With my 52 workers, I could go and build my dreams. One house is to watch the sunset. This is something interesting, I think, if we deal with Africa in general, that you have to give them a big challenge. This building is 4 stories high, and people said, no, it's impossible. You can't do a building in mud 4 stories high, but we did it. There were tremendous discussions. There were people saying, like, I once heard a Tuareg saying, not me, he's losing his goats. That means he's going crazy. But we did. At the end, we were able to make this house, which is 4 stories high, and it's just to watch the sunset. 2 weeks ago, the beginning of September, Agadez, maybe you saw it, was home to tremendous floods. Half of the city has been destroyed. And I heard that people went up to this house with sandbags trying to protect this house. And when they asked, why do you protect this house? It's just a house to watch the sunset. They said, this is the best we have. Great company. So I thought that once this is done, this building was done, I should be doing this building, because it is quite a remarkable building. You cannot add or take away anything. It's kind of pure. I thought of doing one of these worldwide. Just like Americans tend to build military bases worldwide, why shouldn't I be able to do kind of a more poetic approach towards the world? And so I'm building this house to watch the sunset in Patagonia for Chile, for the Americas. One building is going to be done in Tasmania for Australia, in Yunnan, in the south of China, and for Europe, it's going to be outside of Oslo, in a place called Stavanger in Norway. So this is some of my works. People ask, but how you do this actually? Well, you're only an artist. Why do you have like 55 people working? The thing is that what is very important, I think, is that you come up immediately with ideas how to be able to pay for all this. And this is with working with the people in Africa and in other places. For example, in Nepal, I went there in the 90s. A man came up with a burnt child and asked me to help him. Because I'm white, so I said, I agreed, okay, I'm going to try to help your child, which was burned the day before on hot milk. I brought him to the hospital in Kathmandu, and with Western arrogance, I went up to the doctor and said, you better take care of this child. I brought him in from 60 kilometers away, and he just looked at me. And the way he looked at me, I just realized, God, I have to change. I can't use this arrogance anymore. We became friends with this doctor, and what he said is what we need is a burn unit in Nepal. We don't have it. This happens very often. Kids get burned, and what we don't have is a burn unit. So on the way back to Switzerland, I was thinking, how could I build a hospital in Nepal? I'm not an industrialist, I'm just an artist. So I went to the bottom of this accident that has happened with this child, and there was this child was burned on hot milk, and the fire which they used was done with cow dung. Okay, because the only wood they had, they sold it to tourists that went up on K2. So I was thinking, on the way back to Switzerland, we have lots of cow dung in Switzerland, right? So why don't I take the cow dung, I bronze it, and make it into a sculpture, 1,000 pieces, I sell it to the West, and then I can build the hospital, which I did, and could also pay with the school in Africa, for example, with cow dung. I have 1 minute.
Thank you. You have extraordinary examples, both with Leah speaking about Anna Sokolov, who developed her work, and sometimes, not all the time, it involved political themes like the theme of Holocaust, which brought people together to think in a different way. With what Noam has just described, he's taken something that perhaps I'll say for myself, I take for granted. The sun. I want to see it. I go out and I look at it. And he's taken his artwork, and he's been able to create something in how many cities now?
It's in 5 continents.
Yeah, which is amazing, to be able to give people something that they say, this is what we have, this is the most important thing we have. There's something extraordinary about that. I remember once I was asked, why do I need to give money for your performing arts organization when I've got people I need to feed? I'm being asked for money for certain organizations. And I looked at him and I said, you need to give both of us money. You need to give him the money because you have to feed them, and you need to give me the money because we're feeding the soul. What these people are doing is feeding the soul. And moving right along, Rob, I'd like to ask you to talk about, this is someone who's working as a curator, as a presenter, who's thinking about what these artists are doing and others, and then bringing that work to his space in the UK. Can you talk a little bit about the work that specifically as it relates to global interdependence?
Yeah, those were 2 really excellent stories, first from Leah and Nort, and I don't think I can really follow them in a way, but I'm an art curator, and one of the things we have in in art is we have some problems with truth. We don't have that. We have a relativity. We don't have that certainty of pushing the arm down. So I thought, I've worked with over 200 artists in a 22-year career as a curator, and I was thinking, well, who will I talk about here? But actually, I'll talk about an artist I haven't worked with, because I came here by train. And I came here by train through Bulgaria. And coming on the train, watching the countryside of Bulgaria going past, made me think of the artist Christo, another artist with a single name. And Christo, I went to a very good lecture by Christo a long time ago, in which he talked about that landscape. He's Bulgarian. And he said when he was an art student in communist Bulgaria, the students had to go and do kind of agricultural duties. You know, they had to form work squads in the Stalinist sense. And his job, because he was an art student, was to rearrange the countryside. So you see, the Orient Express, that wonderful symbol of capitalism, used to pass through the Bulgaria, and what he had to do was rearrange all the hay bales and the landscape all along that train line so that the people who went in the train could think that the 5-year plan had been achieved. So, yeah, truth. Out of those 200 artists I've worked with, I wanted to bring some images. So I was told I couldn't use images. So let's think about Marshall McLuhan, who talked about hot and cold media, and we'll think about the images flashing up here a bit as I talk to you about another kind of space. And thinking about truth and certainty, let's think about something I can grasp onto. What is that? Gravity. Gravity is the thing that's pushing us down into our seats at the moment. And I can see someone from NASA in here, and I think she knows something about gravity and microgravity, possibly even. But I've actually organised microgravity flights at the Yuri Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Centre for over 50 artists. And that has got me thinking about space, orbital space, planetary space, not just the space of the public, but also another space which is not really very public. I think it's a place where only a certain elite can go. They're called astronauts and cosmonauts. And so we're really interested in the idea of how, if we have this wonderful enterprise to get people off the Earth, how can we make that more relevant to, the person in one of your villages? I mean, how is that relevant? And interestingly, I've just been working in India, and we're working on a project with the Indian Space Research Organisation about their Chandrayaan launch and getting school children to visualize what they feel about the moon and the idea of India being on the moon. This whole idea of, stepping off the Earth, as a famous Russian futurist said, futurist and engineer, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky said, Earth is a cradle, but we can't stay in the cradle forever. But we have climate change, we have the problems on Earth. How do we deal with that? Most recently, I presented at a conference at Tate, Britain, the other Tate in Britain, Helen and Mayor Newton Harrison. And they have started talking. I see a lot of you wearing these tick, tick, tick pendants. They say it's too late. They think it's too late. They think we have to start organising now, reorganising our infrastructures after the disasters wrought by climate change. And that is something I think that maybe artists can be involved in. Autonomy, infrastructures, thinking about how to organise in very small ways. Artists right now, I know, are building a coal-fired computer, which is a bit provocative. Artists setting up their own systems of transportation. Artists setting up their own space program. So I'd like to introduce this new space of autonomy. I think someone said something about Mungos, my own non-governmental organisation. I think it might have been pejorative, but I think a lot of artists are Mungos. They have my own non-governmental organisations, and it's their space.
Thank you. I think another thing that you're hearing here that many
Let's see if I made something. Yeah, no, that's good. Sometimes I'm not sure if I'm making sense, so it's useful to see.
All right, so Ben says we're over because we started late. And so what I'm going to do now is turn to you all. We have a lot to say. We're talking next to the house. But I'm going to turn to all of you and ask you, do you have questions for any people on the panel or comments?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment because all what you said reminded me of an exhibition the Father of My Children organized in the year 2000 in Paris. He called his exhibition in French. It's a puzzle word, which is not going to be, I'm not going to be able to translate it. It's called L'essence de la vie. L'essence means the senses, but it also means the gas for the car. And he put
Excuse me, we can't hear you from the panel because people are talking. Can you not talk? Thanks. No, it's not you, it's the people who are talking.
In the year 2000 in Paris, right in front of Notre Dame, in a public place, he had, I don't know if you heard the beginning, I was saying that it's the Father of My Children had this open-air exhibition in front of Notre Dame on a public square nearby a street, and the exhibition was called L'essence de la vie. L'essence having in French the advantage of the sound being exactly the same for senses, like the sight or the taste, and l'essence is the gas also for the car. And with the city of Paris, the municipality, their idea was to say, the new millennium is up, cars are going to be out. So they placed the exhibition on a square. Of course, all the cars where you could see those big cars, and he took old mobiles and, you know, very, very old-fashioned American cars, which he decorated with the different senses, the nose, the mouth, etc. And of course, people driving by would stop to watch, would slow down their cars in order to be able to watch the exhibition. And he created the biggest traffic jams ever experienced in Paris in July, which is usually when people are not around. So in other ways, as an artist, he used a tool to make people think about cars in a different way. And that was the start of a whole new policy about cars in Paris. Unfortunately, not a very successful one for the moment.
Thank you very much. You'll have to come. I'm sorry. Everyone wants to hear what you have to say. Say who you are. You have to hold from here.
No, it's okay. I'm Gabriela from Mexico, as you may think I'm a Gabriela model. But besides that, I would like to say that I think you're the most loved people, because you have the chance to know who you are. We, since we are very small, we are very young, we never learn how to be ourselves. We start, someone is giving us lessons about how to write, how to read, how to eat, but nobody says, how are you? Who are you? How do you become yourself? How can you think of what you want? What is your will in your life? Until you have to grow up and then discover that something is inside of you that makes you different. I think we've seen people talking about industrial development, but economic development, but not human development, our self-development. And that is the beginning for accessing to truth. I can't say what is truth, what the truth is, if I don't know myself truly. What is my will? What is what I am going to do with my life? It's a very short time we have. How can I will spend it until we are old, and then we discovered, oh, I want to become an artist. I want to know, I want to say who I am. And then you start reflecting about yourselves, and then you have the chance to say others something in your own language. We don't have that understood of life. You know the life before it, after it ends, and some of us never know who we were, what we wanted. So thanks for making us a new world in each hand. You all have the chance, and we don't.
Leah wants the microphone.
I just want to quickly respond to that, Mario, because my feeling ultimately about art, because I'm both an artist and a keen observer of art. I really feel like my whole 50 years of a dance experience has been about answering the question for myself, what is art? And the more I think about it, the more I participate in it as both a spectator and a maker of art, I think it's really reducible to a basic principle that it is about looking and listening. And that is something that we all do, all human beings, whether or not we choose to follow a path to spend an inordinate amount of time, creating a vision and an artifact, that represents how we're looking and listening. But what artists do is look deeply and carefully. They listen deeply and carefully. And if they are successful, when an artwork is successful, to me it creates a space. And it can be in a public space. I hope that art in public space does that. All these examples do that. Where even people who are not artists can share in that experience of deep looking and deep listening. And it's interesting to me that my experience is that the most successful times when that's really happening in a community of people, when that communication is really happening, there is at some point a moment of silence. There's a moment of calm, a moment of silence. And one of the things that I think public space needs to do is to create a space that has the potential for that deep listening and looking, so that we can all, artists or not, encounter each other in that space of calm and quiet. And it's, Tariq yesterday said humility leads to dialogue. I would also say silence leads to listening, which leads to dialogue, which leads to democracy. And so it's looking and listening that's really what the imperative is here.
Very important point to hear. Any more questions about this? Yes, you do.
big argument with Michael Woods, who's sitting over there, on the question of instrumentality in public art, and quite precisely this question, because we have here a paradox, I think, in instrumentality, that the whole idea of art changing the world, but then the government wants to kind of change the world, they hire an artist in to change the world, and if the government happens to be of a shade you might agree with, maybe they're left wing, the art suddenly goes into service of the political ideology. And that can swing both ways, right and left. I would argue against instrumentality myself. What do you think?
If you look at public spaces in general, let's take the public spaces which attracts most people. Let's take the marketplaces, for example. Architects, city of architects, the marketplace is working, it's vibrant, it's working since 400 years. If you go to, let's say, Lucca, Italy, the marketplace there, the old forum is not working anymore since about 20-35 years because they have all these supermarkets that opened up around the city, and the market is empty. It doesn't have it doesn't work anymore. They for a while maybe with cars and stuff, garbage bins, whatever, and they get rid of that here. In the States, for example, if you take New York, you have these commercial centers like downtown Manhattan, where you have a counter sculpture, a duvet sculpture in front of a building, a glass building. It looks great. It's wonderful. These places in the States are very vibrant during the daytime. I mean, there's all the shops that can't pass through because there's so many people. There's stores. There are even warehouses. And in the evening, everything closes, okay, and it becomes almost like a ghost town. Now, what should we do as artists? You know, like, of course, we participate. I think we have to get involved and all that. We need to work together with like anyone. Okay? We need to come up with ideas. The gap between architecture, for example, and art is closing. Okay? Thanks to technology, you don't have buildings that go up straight anymore. They go up on an angle. Like you look at the CCTV building in Beijing, it goes up on an angle. Suddenly, this is becoming a sculpture. Like, why is the building of the bird's nest, the stadium, so successful? It's because from the very beginning, there's an artist, by the way, working with entrepreneur, two architects together. Tremendous success. I think like if you get so many people, you need to do like a sculpture in front of a building, saying, okay, this is a public building, because this is a sculpture in itself. And even to try to put maybe a big sculpture in front of the CCTV would be as absurd as trying to put a sculpture in front of the Gaudi house in Barcelona. You don't need, because it's already a great piece of art.
Can I
just a little, two anecdotes. There was, you talk from Detroit, and there's a seminary there. There's a picture of Jesus, and I watched it where I was in Catholic school, and I looked at this statue for many years. So one Christmas, someone decided, this was in the 60s, someone decided to paint Jesus black. So that's what happened. They painted black. The immediate reaction was to paint it white again. But there was such an outcry from the population that they decided, they had a meeting and they said, well, maybe it wasn't such a bad idea to paint this statue black. So they did that. That's one anecdote. The second one is that I was an ex-GI, Vietnam veteran, and very much opposed to the wars now. And I live in Germany. And there was a statue, you know, which is art also. You know, these guys who make these monuments, they're artists. And so there's this big monument to the First World War, and which in Germany means that if it's a monument to the First World War, they're very reluctant to criticize the cops. Not as if they have someone like Hitler to criticize. So I watched it for many years, and we wanted to make a statement, and now I'm going to admit to a crime. So we looked at this monument with these 4 German soldiers in their long coats and their rifles and their steel helmets, and we decided we were going to deface it. So we threw red paint on it. And I just want to say that there are instances where people will look at a piece of art and it goes through some kind of transformation, and also the whole question, the question of the building going off to the angle. I'd like to see what some graffiti artists would do with that.
Jackie, I wanted to ask a question. Do I say Zeynep? Zeynep. Because we walked last night on the square between Hagia Sophia and Blue Mosque. There's this sort of an installation of benches. Is that something was part of the development? Is it, in a way, it's a strange thing. There's all these.
I've seen it. It's an installation.
All these benches. They're used by people. If you sit on it and you sit really close to each other, it's kind of a kind of meeting place. It's an interesting place. I was wondering whether this was part of the development and how you looked at it.
Son et lumière. It's created so that at night tourists can watch. But this is a very
It's not an installation.
So it's art without
accidental art.
Accidental art. Interesting. It's often the best.
That's Luna Park.
That's Luna Park. Yeah.
Is that it turned into something else during the day, and that's what you're watching. And I think what I liked, I really appreciated your looking and listening idea, Leah, because I think the artists are at their best, not being one I can say anything about them, they're at their best when they look and listen and when they're humble. And I'm very much with you that artists cannot change the world. They can learn a lot from how the world changes, but being humble, being modest, I think, creates the best art, and sometimes art that is not intended to be art turns into the best art.
Do you want?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, this way.
Sorry. There you go.
The panel has covered a fascinating diversity of themes, but I'm not sure you yet confronted the actual defining theme of the panel, which is shaping public space. And maybe the reason for that is we've missed the key term, which is privatization. We've lived now for 30, 40, 50 years in a privatized world of market society where our formally public spaces have been privatized. Both pointed out that that's partly because the malls and so on outside of cities have destroyed the downtown commons that used to be our common space. But as you know, many cities and towns are trying to revive public space in the city. Most recently in Times Square, the traffic was diverted from Times Square and Herald Square, two of the largest intersections, and made available for the public. But the only thing the city did was put some lounge chairs. Okay, here's some chairs you can sit down in some big blockades to keep the traffic off. Now it's public instead of a commercial vehicular avenue. So my question is, what role will artists play, not by putting a statue in a public space, it's called a mobile in a public space, but in actually helping to reshape? This example of the benches was accidental. It created a public space, sort of accidental. The question is, can we do, as artists, have an impact on the shaping of space to republicize our privatized commons, our privatized agora? And that should be the
your bench story? And no, you want to take that on? You have your bench story.
We definitely have Well, first of all, I mean, what can we do? We have to come up, we always can come up with ideas. We could fill up the place downtown Manhattan at night with clowns, maybe, you know. I mean, we're constantly drawn into as artists because we have this strange position that we are kind of political and apolitical. We are kind of like the people who are part of society, but we are also still a bit the weirdos in a way. So like in my hometown in Saint, which has 1,000 people, the bench in the center of the piazza was suddenly removed. The bench has been there since 1622, and the person said, well, I take the bench away because people are smoking cigarettes in front of my house, and you know, buses are kind of that. So he took the bus away. So like the mayor cannot go to this man and say, listen, you better put back your bench. I mean, it was a big thing. I would go with my 93-year-old mother to the town. I said, wow, the bench is not here anymore. So, like, I have to step in, and I could. I mean, it's easy because I went up to the person and said, listen, you better put back your bench. And he said, no, I'm not. So I said, well, okay, I'm going to make a bench for you. I said, okay, maybe. So now there is a bench again. Like, we have to get involved, and we have to come up every time. It's a new idea. And we have to come up with new ideas all the time.